Well, death. Is that all there is to it? Certainly from a scientific point of view, that is all there is to it. From a strictly scientific point of view, there is no evidence that death is anything but the whole extinction of the whole person. So-called NDEs, for example, near-death experiences, are really evidence of nothing more than what goes on in the consciousness of a person this side of the grave under certain circumstances. Yet the temptation to believe that there is more to death is almost overwhelming, isn't it? How can we cope with the fact that one day we may not exist at all? How can we cope with the fact that people who have been dear to us, who have belonged to us, have been part of us in some way, no longer exist, consciously? How can we cope with the fact that many die young, destitute, never having had a chance to fulfill anything like their potential as human beings? One temptation is simply not to think about it, to avoid the whole business of death as much as possible. Many people in our society live that way, live for the now, live for the moment, avoid as much as possible contact with the dying, even dying relatives. As much as possible, many leave them to the care of professionals, keeping death hidden from themselves. All this is very understandable, but it's also soul-destroying. What a tragedy it is when people who have given no thought to death, who have no resources for coping with dying, come to their own end and suddenly turn for answers. By far the most common approach to death over the centuries has been in some way to deny it, to suggest that the real person, the part that matters, the soul or spirit, somehow survives death. Death, many people believe, is not so much an end of life as a change from one life to another, from one world to another. Hindus believe this, so in a different way to Buddhists. And so many people in our society have taken over from their religions the concept of reincarnation. But of course, whether you believe in reincarnation or not, or whether or not you believe in God, many people in our society also believe that the part of the person that really matters survives death. Many, even Christians, seek comfort in those so-called NDEs, near-death experiences. Some even dabble in the very ancient practice of spiritualism, trying to contact the souls or spirits of dead people, a practice roundly condemned in the Bible. Let no one be found among you who sacrifices his son or daughter in the fire, who practices divination or sorcery, interprets omens, engages in witchcraft, or casts spells, or who is a medium or spiritist, or who consults the dead. Well, many sincere Christians believe it too. This idea that the real you is immortal, that the real you somehow or other survives death. The spirit or soul goes on to live somewhere, perhaps in purgatory, perhaps in heaven, perhaps in a torment in hell, even before the last judgment, even before Jesus Christ returns, even though not one of the great traditional Christian creeds of the Church says so. The immortality of the human soul or spirit, the idea that the real you is immortal, has often been associated in people's minds with the further thought that there is in human nature a divine spark, that the immortal soul or spirit is itself divine. Now, although many Christians do not believe that, many Christian teachers and leaders have in fact taught something like that, even though these ideas do not come from the Christian Bible at all. They are simply not to be found in the Bible. Where do these ideas come from? Well, they have certainly been there for many centuries in traditional Asian religion. But they first entered and became popular in European or Western thinking through the writings of the great and influential Greek philosopher Plato, who lived around about 428 to 348 BC. You may never have read anything of Plato, although it's easy to get hold of his writings even today. But if you're inclined to believe that your soul or spirit is immortal, you are certainly under his influence. What does the Bible say? God alone is immortal. God alone is immortal. What then does the Bible say about you and me? Man's fate, says the Bible, is like that of the animals. The same fate awaits them both. As one dies, so dies the other. All go to the same place. All come from dust. All to return to dust again. Now, I know that some people try to say that this is not typical of Scripture, but it is. It corresponds exactly with Genesis 3:19. You are dust, and to dust you will return. Or in the New Testament with 1 Corinthians 15 verse 47, the first man is from the earth, a man of dust. Or with Psalm 146, put not your trust in princes, in a son of man in whom there is no help. When his breath departs, he returns to his earth. On that very day, his plans perish. You will see during this course of videos just how consistent the Bible is in presenting this realistic account of death. Do not put your trust in human nature, says the Bible, but put your trust in God alone. You see, the greatest danger in all this idea of the immortal soul, apart from the fact that it's simply unsubstantiated wishful thinking, the greatest danger is that it takes our attention away from the one in whom our salvation really lies, God, and focuses our attention upon our own selves, our own nature, our own so-called potential, our own so-called immortal self. And that is the most damnable lie that Satan has ever sold the human race. The very first book of the Bible, Genesis, tells us how Satan tempted the first man and woman with these very ideas. You will not die, he said to Eve. Rather, you will be like God, knowing good and evil. The temptation to believe that our salvation or our destiny lies in our own hands, irrespective of God, that is the most deadly temptation that we face. And it's at the heart of this whole tradition of the immortality of the human soul. The Bible, on the other hand, exposes this idea as a lie. In its place, the Bible puts something absolutely solid and real. Jesus Christ. Your salvation, your destiny, lies not in cultivating your own immortal soul, not in discovering some so-called God within you, but in turning in faith to God's one and only Son, Jesus Christ.